I shambled up the stairs on all fours, my legs crying out as fresh adrenaline flooded through me. I could hear him cursing as he tried to wrench the door open, and it sounded like he had broken it worse than I'd thought. The back porch was glassed in, all of it shatter-resistant, except for the door. The door was an intricate piece of work my grandfather had made for my parents' wedding. It sounded like he had put a crowbar through it, and was now having trouble getting the ruins open. It was a little sad thinking about it smashed and ruined, my dead grandfather's last great work, but I would mourn its loss later. As I scrambled across the upstairs landing, I heard the door crunch open, and the sound of boots on the linoleum in the kitchen. I crawled into my room and closed the door behind me, moving to the computer as I tried to turn it on. Shaking the mouse got me nowhere, and I had to stop myself from screaming when I realized that it had turned off. I pressed the button, and as it came to life, I strained my ears as I tried to hear the potential killer downstairs. I could hear some voices from below, some stomping around, but it was all muffled by the floor that lay between us. As the computer came on, I pulled up the messenger program on Steam and typed a hasty message to Daniel and Mark. I need help. The man from the basement found me. I need someone to help me. Someone call the police and send them to my house. I watched hopefully, willing one of them to look at their computer or hear the sound from that message, but nothing happened. No one typed, no one saw, no one responded. After about 30 seconds, I was forced to come to terms with the idea that I might be sunk. There was a murder in my house, a man who had murdered many times, and I didn't want to be the latest in a long line of victims. If he caught me in the confines of my bedroom, I'd be dead for sure, and my room did not have the luxury of roof access from the window. As wet as it was, I'd be more likely to slip off the roof and get killed on the lawn after I broke my legs. No, my best option of escape would be out the front door, and I cursed myself for not running for it when I was downstairs. I looked at the door to my bedroom and gritted my teeth. I needed to escape. I crouched low, peeking out the door as I slunk along the railing, listening for the ensuing footsteps of the man downstairs. He was being noisy about his searching, and it sounded like he was destroying my house. He was calling for me, turning over tables and pushing over bookcases. The longer he looked, the madder it seemed to make him.
Come out. Come out, you little worm. I know you're here. Why not come out and take your punishment like a man?
I slunk along, glancing down as I made my way quietly towards the stairs. He had his back to me, looking into the den as he knocked things around, and I was taken back by the wild and untamed look of him. The last time I had seen him, he'd had a ball cap covering his head, and the sun had hidden his features. I had built him up in my mind, making him into some kind of boogeyman. Seeing him from the back, I remember being pretty unimpressed by him, now that I could see him properly. He was balding, his red hair sticking wetly to his head, and his body was slight and bony. He was dressed in the same jumpsuit, the back proclaiming him to be a repairman for some company I'd never heard of. The jumpsuit was saturated, sticking to him and showing me a series of long and frightfully visible bones. He was bird thin, balding, with a crowbar in his hand and a puddle of water growing under his feet. I had begun to get my nerve up, becoming less and less afraid of this walking scarecrow. Then he spoke again.
Where are you hiding? Are you in the kitchen? Are you in the coat closet? I'll find you. I'm going to take my frustrations out on you before I kill you. Maybe I'll break your fingers one at a time. Maybe I'll skin you one piece at a time, starting with your tenderest ones. Maybe I'll give you a taste of what I gave that girl before the end. Keep hiding. I'll find you, you little worm. I have all afternoon to play with you.
He had turned as he talked, walking back into the living room, and I felt my flesh crawl as I caught sight of him. Have you ever seen someone who you just knew wasn't right? You see them on the subway, in the grocery store, maybe even right next door. They don't even have to say a word. You just know they aren't right. They have a sweaty look about them, a jittery look. It's like that look tells you their skin is barely containing the horror beneath it. This man had that look, and it told me all I needed to know. If he caught me, there would be no escaping unharmed. He moved into the kitchen, and I heard him shoving things around as he yelled about how he was going to make me watch as he ate my fingers. I moved to the head of the stairs, quiet as a shadow, and started moving my way down as he destroyed the other room. I was trying to be quiet, but I knew that my chances were fleeting if I meant to get to the door. Once I got down the stairs, I could bolt for the door and run out in the rain. If he hadn't destroyed my phone, I could call for help and hopefully have the authorities here before he got away. I was nearly halfway down the stairs when I heard the lock opening on the front door. I glanced out the front window, and my breath hung in my throat. Mom's van was idling in the driveway, and I could see the edge of her grocery bag as she fumbled with the keys. She was opening the door, coming into the last thing she would have expected, and I desperately wanted to call out to her. She was in danger, but I couldn't stop her without giving myself away. She came in while I was dithering on the stairs, calling my name as she closed the door behind her. "Come help with the groceries," she called. When I didn't call down to her, she started looking around. Her face went from placid good-naturedness to confusion as she took in the mess. She was scared, that much was obvious, and she looked around for the source of all the destruction as she called my name again. She didn't think I had done it, but was suddenly worried that something had happened to me. As she put her back to the entrance to the den, though, she missed the danger coming up behind her. I saw him rising from the shadows in the den like a monster, but my throat tightened as I tried to warn her. The crowbar sounded like something tapping a keg as it connected with her skull, and she spilled her groceries as she fell bonelessly to the ground. He leapt on her then, her head oozing slightly, and to my horror he lapped at it like a dog. He was a vicious creature, and as she lay there at his mercy, he looked towards the stairs and caught sight of me. We locked eyes, and I saw him snake his arm around her throat as he watched for my reaction. His grin was the same grin from my nightmares. It was cartoonish and insane, and it was the last thing I wanted directed at me.
"There you are. I don't want to hurt her, but I will. You're the one I want. If you come with me, I promise you that no further harm will come to her."
I didn't believe him, but I didn't want him to hurt my mother either. I came down the stairs telling him I would go with him as long as he didn't hurt her. I made the mistake of watching as he dropped her, and she fell bonelessly back to the floor. That's why I didn't see when he swung the crowbar at my head. One minute I was watching her hit the carpet in the foyer, and the next I was swimming in a sea of black. I would probably have stayed swimming there forever if it hadn't been for a familiar voice calling me back. "You need to wake up." I blinked, but it wasn't really a blink. "Get up, or you'll die." My head felt heavy, muzzy, full of cotton. "This isn't supposed to happen to you. You need to get up. Get up while he's distracted." My eyes flickered, and the dark place was replaced with a shadowy place. I could see lights, soft and undefined, followed by occasional harsh intrusions as they scampered across the ceiling. These lights showed me a familiar space, a nightmare space, that I had visited often in my memories. I wasn't against the same wall that Adriana had occupied. I was in between a pair of generators closer to the stairs, and opposite the wall that I had found her on. If I looked across, I could see a similar alcove made by the old generators, and I suddenly wondered if all of these alcoves had been used to stash his victims. How many others had died in this place? Was I about to be one of them? I struggled, but my hands were tied enough to make my wrists burn. I had returned to the warehouse. I was back in the killing bottle. Of the killer, there was no sign. I could hear road traffic above me and feel the sandy concrete beneath me. My legs weren't tied, but my hands had been cruelly restrained. Whatever he had used to bind my hands dug painfully into my wrists. The more I struggled, the more they seemed to chafe, and I had to stop the urge to yell and give myself away. "You need to hurry," said Adriana's voice in my head. "He won't be gone for long." I wiggled around, looking for some way to get my hands loose. If I could get my hands free, maybe I could surprise him. Maybe I could avoid him. Maybe even get away and go tell somebody. I started rubbing my hands against things, looking for sharp parts, and I was coming up with nothing. The machinery was all smooth metal, the rust flaking off before it could begin to bother my bindings at all. The concrete was too flat, and all the glass on the floor was too small or ground to sand. After a few minutes of struggling around, my fingers felt like they were full of splinters, and my wrists ached from the effort of trying to free myself. I was about to give up when I fumbled against the piece of metal. It made a loud, angry noise when I bumped it, and my fingers went straight to searching for it. It had fallen off something, and the side of it was rusty and jagged. The end had a cruel point on it, and as I worked the edge against my bindings, I felt whatever it was start to part. I had to be careful not to cut myself, but as the sound of that half-crazed voice came closer and began to fill the basement, I stopped caring. I needed to get loose before he came back, and as my blood coated the bindings, my arms getting sliced up in the endeavor, I felt the work become a little easier.
No, I won't tell you where I am. It doesn't matter anyway.
He was coming down the stairs, talking to someone as he descended. I was about 30 feet from the stairs, I judged, and as I sliced at the bindings, I knew I wouldn't have time to hide. He would be on me in a minute, and if I didn't have my hands free, I'd be screwed.
So what if I am? That's just one more reason the therapy isn't working. Maybe I'm killing someone right now. That's just one more failure on your conscience.
I heard the grating of glass as he came to the bottom of the stairs. I felt the ropes slacken a little as I sawed through them.
Oh? Then why haven't you told the police yet? Is it because you know you'd be an accessory to murder? Is it because you know they would ask why you didn't tell them after the first time? Or is it because you know that once my mommy gets me out on bail, I'd come to your house and find your children?
He was getting closer now, his footsteps clomping on the concrete. I gritted my teeth, sawing at my arms slightly as I felt the restraints giving slowly. "Be still," Adriana warned me. I laid back against the machinery, slitting my eyes as I held the piece of metal. His shadow fell over me, and I could feel those eyes as they slid across my body. They were like spider legs on my face, and I dared not move an inch as he inspected me. He took a step towards me then, and through my slitted eyes I could see a knife in his hand. It was a long one, like a butcher's knife, and the blade was rusty red and thick-looking. This was probably what he had used to kill Adriana, what he had used to kill all the people before me, and if he decided to slide it into me now, I was dead. He brought his face very close to mine, and I could smell his crazed sweat as it slid down his skeletal face. I could also hear the voice on the phone that he had pressed against his ear. Whoever was talking to him on the phone was clearly not telling him what he wanted to hear. I could see his face changing from frenzied glee to barely contained rage. When he pulled away, his feet made an angry sound across the concrete. He walked to the end of the aisle and started yelling at them, and that seemed to be the moment of my reprieve. As I sawed, though, I saw the string between us thrumming and pulsating, and realized I didn't have much time left unless I hurried.
Don't you dare. Don't you dare talk to me like that. You couldn't help me. You couldn't cure me. You couldn't stop me. And now, these people are dead. This is your fault. You are responsible for this. Your pills and your sessions and your listening didn't help. So what are you gonna do? The only thing you can do is keep listening, keep helping, keep watching me kill as I...
When the bindings parted, I almost dropped the piece of metal in my excitement. I was free. I was loose. I could... What could I do? I was still trapped between this man and my freedom. My eyes were on the string, and as I watched, I saw the thrumming pulse that slid between us. The bead of midnight lit the cord in a soupy glow, and I suddenly realized something very important. The direction of the bead had never changed, but I began to understand that it had been telling me my direction the whole time. I gripped the metal as I rose, slowly, quietly, and crept towards him. He was shouting into the phone, screaming at the speaker as he told them 1,000 different torments he would visit on them. Adriana was silent, a voiceless passenger on my road to salvation, and as the man turned, I was already in mid-swing. Maybe he heard me, maybe he didn't, but his face registered utter surprise as the piece of metal slid into the side of his neck. The phone clattered to the ground, and he coughed blood directly into my face. He fell, red arterial blood flowing from between his fingers as I stood over him. The crazy seemed to be spilling out of him too, and he looked at me with a cloudy sort of understanding. His prey had gotten the better of him, his victim had escaped, and now he was the one looking at death. He reached with a shaky hand for the phone, his hairy digits looking like a fat spider, and I stepped on his hand as I bent down to whisper to him, "The string was never for you. The string was for me. The string knew what I had to do, even if I didn't." His face registered nothing but confusion, and as he died, the black string began to fray and tumble to pieces. It had served its purpose, and now it was gone. The woman on the other end of the phone was shouting for Harold, shouting again and again. but I hung up on her as I used the phone to call emergency services. It was the second body I needed to report in this place, and I knew they would have questions. The police arrived on scene in a matter of minutes. They seemed skeptical about my story almost from the first word. The reporting individual in 2 crimes, both in the same location, was a little hard to explain, but when the officer called in my description and they asked about the Amber Alert, he started to take me a little more seriously. Turned out, Dad had come home a little earlier than expected and found my mother unconscious on the floor and me missing. The signs of a break-in led the police to believe that I had been kidnapped by a burglar, and they had taken my mother to the hospital and started canvassing the city for me. It appeared that I had been found, and with the evidence in the killer's van and on his phone, the case was pretty open and shut. Harold Greer was a 50-year-old trust fund baby, living with his mother and siphoning off her wealth. The van, the jumpsuit, they were all simply smokescreens in order to get into people's houses and find new victims. He had been using this warehouse for decades, and it was only recently that the cops had started finding bodies here. The police estimated that his body count might be in the teens, but they have other remains here that might raise that number into the 30s or 40s. I was given an accommodation by the chief of police for valor, both in finding Adriana and in fending off my killer. They put on a big show of it, and I think the media had given them some flack for thinking I was a suspect. The officers involved did not look pleased, but they ate their crow, and there were no hard feelings about it. People make mistakes, right? "Have you ever considered a career in law enforcement?" the chief asked, shaking my hand and giving me a grandfatherly smile. "You sound like you have the mettle for it." It hadn't crossed my mind before then, but I'm definitely giving it some thought after all of this. For now, though, I'm enjoying a nice, quiet life as a typical high school student. The strings remain, of course, and I still use them to help my friends navigate the pitfalls of high school. I haven't had a black string since that night, but I'm still young, so I'm sure there will be plenty of time for more murder attempts. When I see them, though, I try to keep people away from them as best I can, so they can avoid the fate waiting for them down the line. If I can save people with this gift, it makes me feel a little better about not being able to save Adriana. Of her, I haven't heard a word since that night. Whatever she was looking for, it seems she found it when her killer died. I'm glad the two of us could find our peace. Good evening, everyone. It's me, Dr. Plague. Thank you so much for joining me for tonight's story. I hope you've enjoyed the Strings series. This is the last part of it, but it might not be the last we ever see of the Strings. You never know. If you're new to the channel, I've got several new playlists up. That's probably the place I'd start. I've organized them pretty well by time of posting, so that's a great place to get familiar with my content. I would also look for a compilation of these 4 stories sometime in the near future. You know how I like my long videos. Let's go ahead and thank our sponsors. Thanks to Leslie Lou Riddle for being our Spooky Skeleton tier contributor. Thanks, Leslie. We just couldn't do it without you. If you'd like to support the show, come on down to Patreon. There's a link in the link tree below. For just $5 a month, you too can have your name read out at the end of every TikTok and every YouTube video that I make. I have several tiers up there now, so if you think you might like a commission or you might like to join our book club tier, come on down. I'm sure we have something for everyone. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.